Alright guys, my name is Metagoblin and today I'm going to be giving you a guide on how to prepare for Phase 3 and the Blackwing Lair raid that will probably be releasing in the next 2 months. My general recommendation, guys, is to prepare as early as possible. Blackwing Lair is a very different scenario to Molten Core and Onyxia Lair. The raid is substantially harder, and you know, Blackwing Lair has been described as an absolute guild killer, so it is definitely good and recommended for you to start preparing for those adversaries and those difficulties early on. So that's why I'm releasing this video early as today. But anyway, just before we jump in, guys, please do give me a quick follow on Twitch if you want to catch any of my live streams. So this video is going to be separated into 7 main points, 7 tips on what you should do, you know, to prepare for Blackwing Lair and for Phase 3 in its entirety. So, and one of the really big themes that's you'll probably notice with every single each of these points that I'm going to make, the first one is gold. You are going to need a lot of gold and a lot of money. So I definitely recommend farming gold pretty much as soon as you possibly can. My personal recommendation would be to have at least a minimum of 400 gold when Blackwing Lair is released. Preferably about 800 gold, to be honest, and that is my general recommendation because you are going to be spending a lot of consumables and stuff like that, but we'll talk about that more later. Because the second point is probably the most important thing that you need to get you know, for Blackwing Lair, and that simply is the Onyxia Scale Cloak. So every single raid member is going to need this item if you have even want a chance at taking down the last boss in Blackwing Lair, and tanks will also need it for even earlier bosses. As you can see, here are the materials here. You're going to need a rune thread, cinder cloth, cloak, which is a tailing recipe, and the scale of Onyxia. So you're going to have to work very closely with the tailors in your guild to create as much of these as possible. I imagine your guild has probably already been stockpiling them, you know, stockpiling the scale of Onyxia, and you're going to need, I would say, like at least 2 level workers in your guild to create all these items, but to be honest, you can probably get away with just having 1 guy with level working. In order to actually get the recipe, what you need to do is give a level worker the Onyxia head attunement quest. You know, when you turn in the head, that drops on Onyxia, and then what happens is you automatically learn the recipe when you turn in the head. I think you actually do miss the, you know, the server, well, not server wide, but you do miss the, you know, world buff when you turn it in as a level worker, because it didn't work for me, but I don't know about that. But anyway, that's how you obtain the recipe. So you are going to you should start creating as many Onyxia scale cloaks as humanly possible, probably, you know, sooner rather than later. The reason why you actually need these cloaks is because there's a certain mechanic in the last boss and the bosses before where essentially this isn't, I think the ability is called like Shadow Flame or something like that. I think it does actually say it, yeah, engulfed by Shadow Flame. Basically this prevents you from being one-shotted by an ability on the Thorium, so obviously if nobody in your raid has this item, the entire raid will just get one-shotted, so yeah, it is pretty essential. The next really important thing that you're going to need for Blackwing Lair is fire resistance gear. It is recommended that you stack, well, it's recommended for warriors, DPS and tanks to stack up to 200 fire resistance gear. For rogues it's 150, and then for everyone else it should be 100. You may be thinking, well, to be honest, that's a bit overkill, and in many ways it might be, depending on what gear you have. But what I'd recommend is stacking basically as much fire resistance gear as you can, and then fair enough, sometimes you may not need to equip all the fire resistance gear, but it's better to be over prepared than under prepared. So I'd recommend getting a good gear set going that literally has all the fire resistance gear that you have, and then you might, you know, you can use item rack to switch between the item sets and stuff like that. And then you may be struggling with a certain boss, in which case it's probably a better idea to put all your fire resistance gear in order for, you know, for you to progress through the boss. And then, you know, once the guild learns the tactics a bit more, once your gear gets a little bit better, you may not need to equip so much fire resistance gear. I will link a guide in the description from Baron's Chat, which is the best guide I've ever been able to find on fire resistance gear, basically recommending some really strong pieces that you can pick up. What I'm noticing, general recommendation for level wearers, if you have a level working profession, I would recommend switching it up to elemental level working so that you can pick up some really good fire resistance gear from doing that. I think you can pick up like at least 558 fire resistance just from a few item pieces that you can craft, which would be really useful. There's items like Royal Seal of Enfalas, you know, trinket items, ring items, necklace items. I would lurk the auction house a little bit looking for necklaces and rings which have really high fire resistance. I think I have a few which have over 20, so you know, stacking 40 on your rings is pretty easy, because like, you're trying to like get as much as possible on bad gear pieces, if you know what I mean. So like, you on your smaller gear pieces like rings and necklaces that provide release stats, you want to be swapping them with fire resistance gear rather than swapping big gear pieces with fire resistance gear, because then that will drop your DPS more. So yeah, I'd recommend looking in the auction house, looking for a few pieces. They are normally quite expensive because people understand the value of fire resistance gear. But those are my general recommendations. There are a few quests that you can pick up. If you look in our guide, if you like scroll down to the bottom, there's loads of quest reward recommendations, like the Seal of the Archimega, Seal of Ascension. There's some items that you can pick up from certain bosses that don't need to be crafted. Like there's a boss in Stratholme with a leather gear piece with plus 20 fire resistance, which is pretty useful for, you know, for anyone, you know, mail wearers, leather workers, and plate wearers. So yeah, just have a look around. Get farming your fire resistance gear, because you definitely will need it for Blackwing Lair, because it isn't a cakewalk like Molten Core was. It is going to be difficult, and if you want to progress smoothly through the raid, you are going to need your fire resist gear. And third point, I may as well run on to that very quickly, is you can get a number of enchants. You can get a Cloak enchant, which will add 15 fire resistance. You get a Chromatic Mantle of the Dawn, which adds all resistances by 5, but needs to be exalted with the Argent Dawn. There's also a worse one called a Flame Mantle of the Dawn, which just increases fire resistance. You've also got the Lesser Arcanum of Resilience, which adds, I think it's 20 plus 20 fire resistance to head and leg gear. So that's, you know, that's a bump in 40 fire resistance gear, which I would recommend doing, because rather than basically you're swapping a DPS enchant for a fire resistance enchant, which is better than swapping an entire gear piece, which provides good DPS, with a gear piece that only provides fire resistance. So I definitely recommend getting the Lesser Arcanum of Resiliences and farming them, and getting them enchanted onto your head and leg gear pieces, because that definitely will basically mean that you'll sacrifice less DPS for the sake of increasing your fire resistance. So yeah. Just wanted to add one last point when it comes to level working. There are a number of the Thorium Brotherhood reputation rewards which give really good level working rewards, basically for fire resistance gear, for melee DPS, and resto druids as well. So what I'd also recommend doing is holding on to the residue that drops from Blackrock depth mobs and stuff like that to increase your reputation. Maybe start doing a little bit of reputation, and, you know, obviously doing a little bit of research into the gear pieces that you want, because for instance the Molten Belt, the Lava Belt are really good item pieces that you can get. If you go to a really simple way to do this is to go to Atlas Loot and find out what items are going to come out in phase 3. As you can see, there's a little like free icon next to the items, and I can very clearly see that a number of really good items are going to come out for you know, in phase 3, which are going to be really good fire resist gear. And if you keep scrolling through, you will, I don't know what this item is here, but you will notice there are a few item pieces which are going to be really useful to you, particularly the Timbermore Brawlers. They're going to be really good for feral druids. So yeah, just stuff like that. Do a little bit of research on what extra gear that you can get in phase 3. Another really big strong point to actually make before I move on is this enchant here, the Mighty Intellect enchant on your weapon, which is going to be, you know, pretty powerful for pretty much any caster, and Mighty Spirit if that's more beneficial to you. So there are like extra enchants also being released as well, so that's another thing to be mindful of. For our fourth point, we're going to talk about consumables. I would recommend stockpiling a few consumables right now. At the end of the day, you don't really need consumables for Molten Core right now. I imagine most people are pretty geared up, and you know, they're ready to just kind of sit into Molten Core and farm the gear that they need. You don't really need consumables for a Molten Core raid night or an Elixir raid night, so you may as well spend a little money now, stockpiling some, you know, decent, like at least like one stack of probably each consumable that you can get, apart from maybe flasks, because that's actually ridiculously expensive. But, you know, obviously your greater fire protection potions, I've got a few here, like the Elixirs of Fortitude. Another great one is the Gordot Green Gog, which you can get from Daimo North Tribute runs, which increases your stamina by 10 and doesn't, you know, conflict with any other kind of buff or anything like that. You know, stamina food buffs, I would always recommend prioritizing your defensive consumables rather than your offensive consumables if you don't have a lot of gold to spare, because, you know, those defensive consumables are actually going to keep you alive in the raids that you're going to be doing. And, you know, it's probably a no-brainer that if you're dead, you're not providing any DPS. If you look at my I've got a consumable combo here that I like to have basically for any kind of progression bosses. I have the Gordot Green Gog, provides stamina by 10, and it will not conflict of anything else. I've got the monster omelette, which increases my health by 120 because it's 12 stamina, and then I've got elixir of fortitude, which basically adds the same. So that equates to about, you know, 300, I think it's 390 health, or it's close to 400 extra health. Added onto my characters. That's, you know, nearly even 500 basically, and that extra health is really useful for progression bosses because, you know, you're able to basically soak more damage. It's important to note that the Lunar Festival will start on the 24th of January. The reason why this is important is because you can turn in 1 coin of ancestry for a stack of 8 festival dumplings, which is probably the best endgame food that you can get actually in the game, because it will regenerate 4% of your health and mana per second for 25 seconds. So while the Lunar Festival is open, I'd basically recommend farming it a little bit to get all this food stacked up for, you know, when Blackwing Lair comes out, especially if a caster, because it's basically cheap, free food. You won't have to pay for food for a long time, you save a little bit of money, you won't have to ask mages for anything, and it's only even going to be useful for mages because it will regenerate your health and mana at the same time. So yeah, basically best in slot in-game, end-game food that you can get very easily when a Lunar Festival is open, so be sure to check that out as well. The next thing we need to talk about is the achievement for Blackwing Lair. Luckily, the achievement for Blackwing Lair is actually really simple and really fast. All you have to do is kill the Scar Shield Quartermaster, which is just near the upper Blackrock Spire entrance. If you just go down the corridor and down the hill, then he's just basically opposite you. It's very easy to find. And then basically he drops an item which starts a quest, and the quest is basically to just kill the last block of upper Blackrock Spire. And then you press the orb after you've killed the last boss, and there you go, Bob's your uncle, you are returned to Blackwing Lair, and it's as simple as that. Last thing I can really recommend is actually learning the tactics for Blackwing Lair. You know, a week before we know that it's released, I'd recommend watching the videos and just getting to know the tactics so you don't make a fool of yourself when you're trying to progress through the raids with your guild, and obviously that helps everyone out massively. I will link a video in the description which pretty much comprehensively explains all the tactics and the trash mobs for everything in Blackwing Lair, so yeah, give that a watch and get prepared for the raid. That's pretty much anyway where I'm going to end the video, guys. My name is Metagoblin. Until my next video, ciao.